It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor. We bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, Lohan, thanks so much for tuning in here on this Wednesday morning. I'm Ryan Kalesuji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. It's been a few months since we caught up with the prosecuting attorney and thought it was a good time to catch up because there is a lot happening here in Honolulu.
That's right. We always love having Honolulu City Prosecutor Steve Alm, and so he joins us this morning from his office downtown. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, good morning, Yanji and Ryan. Great to see you folks again.
I want to get right to the news, and that, of course, there has been so much talk about what happened to the 16-year-old McKinley High School student, Sarah Yara, who was the victim of a hit-and-run incident back in February. A lot of people watching this case very closely. I want to zero in on the case itself and where we are with that, and then talk about the issue of these repeat offenders, traffic violators who are on our roads. But let's start with the case itself. Where are we in this prosecution?
Well, HPD does investigations of all of the traffic collision cases. And when there's deaths or injuries, it often does take a while. And I know people get frustrated and think it ought to be decided already, but they have to do a complete job. We work with them because you got to do it right, not just do it quickly. Our job here, public safety is the first order of business. So we got to make sure we do prosecutions correctly. But I have to say that case, I think, was kind of a galvanizing issue for a lot of departments and agencies around the state. And I know Department of Transportation worked with Transportation Services with the city, and they've set up speed humps in the area and looking at traffic cameras. So I know other people have done it, and we have done the same thing by looking at what we can do to try to help this effort and make the streets safer.
When you look at this person who was arrested and was the driver in this case, there were many who were surprised at the number of traffic violations that he had. That people just wondering, how was he allowed back on the streets? Is there anything that can be done, or that you folks are looking into at the prosecuting office to maybe increase some of the penalties for repeat offenders to prevent this type of situation from happening again?
Right. I think it's when we looked at the number of, and we've been looking at these cases for the last year plus, where there's some horrific cases that have happened. The North Shore, where that guy was allegedly passing a number of people and run head on into this tourist couple. They were both killed in the front seat, daughter in the back seat injured. But when you look at those cases, often the person did have a long traffic history. Now, with traffic decriminalization, which was a good thing from most citizens who, if they do violate a traffic law, they can send in the payment and don't have to come to court. But for the folks that are really irresponsible, what we're doing now is we are going to try to use existing laws to hold them accountable. And that means safer driving without license. Maybe a first time they're caught, they get a fine. Second time, a bigger fine. Third time, we will be asking for some jail time. And we think something has to be done. It's hard to pick up the newspaper or watch the news without seeing a traffic collision virtually every day. We have got to make our streets safer.
I want to ask you, I know that people are impatient with this case. What is the sort of projected timeline, just so that you can temper expectations and so that we have a sense of when we could actually see this go to trial?
Well, first, we don't. We have a policy at the office that we don't comment on existing investigations, even to verify somebody's under investigation, because if in any case, if the person ends up not getting charged, we don't want to be damaging their reputation by talking about what happened. So right now, HPD is working hard on this and any other type of case, and with all deliberate speed. things will get investigated. People will get charged. Sometimes some cases take longer than others, but HPD does a very thorough investigation, and people can be reassured that's happening in every case.
You know, you'd mentioned that this was a galvanizing incident that really brought together different departments. And I'm wondering, just when you're talking about your office, the efforts that you're making to maybe change some of these laws, what else conversations are happening with the legislature? Are they involved at all in this process? And how often and how do you begin to have this sort of conversation, knowing that there is a process to this, that in order to change laws, things do take some time? But where does that conversation start? And is there anything happening with lawmakers at this point to help to move this forward?
Well, soon after the incident, the Speaker of the House came over here. We had a good meeting with him and Chair Tarnas, and many things were discussed about it, including whether there ought to be mandatory minimums. And one of the challenges with mandatory sentences, if you bring it up in one case, people are going to say, wait a minute, what about a sex assault 4? What about an assault? What about other kinds of cases? Why would there be a mandatory sentence for a driving without license and not in those other cases? So I think the idea would be, let's try right now for us to try to get more serious consequences for people, and hope our judges will go along with that. When there's a statute that judges are supposed to look at, like I did for 15 years when I was in the bench, to decide what an appropriate sentence is in every case. And part of it talks about looking at the circumstances of the offense and the history of the defendant. That means how many other convictions have they had? Then you have to look at deterrence. You have to look at how to treat the case seriously and how to protect the public from future crimes of the defendant. So we're hoping that when we ask for jail time, it will get, and the judges will grant that. And that, I think, can be a real deterrent, because people know when they're driving without a license. People know when they're driving without insurance or behaving, irresponsibly. And if they thought they could go to jail for that, I really think it would have a deterrent effect. So we're going to look at that. We're going to keep stats on it, and then we'll see how that goes. But we will be talking to the legislature before the next session, and hopefully we will have had good results in court at holding people accountable.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the history. The individual that we understand who was arrested in this case had 164 traffic violations, many of them quite serious. What the police are doing their job, because they're out there, they intercepted this person, not arrested, but they've cited him. Where do you think the failing is then, if we have the laws already on the books to put someone like this in jail, but they obviously haven't gone to jail, and these are, these violations span for decades. Right. Do you blame the judiciary in this case? I mean, where is the weakest link on this?
Well, like I said, I can't talk about any specific individual case, but I think what you would look at when the whole traffic decriminalization effort went through a long time ago, it would allow people to essentially pay for a check in the mail. And in most cases, even with people that long histories, maybe 80% of their cases involve that kind of a thing. If it was a stop sign, if it was a safety check, if it was something like that, they could pay that through the mail. But at the same time, what we're thinking is, over the years, traffic court has never really looked at harsh consequences. And I think it's time to do that now. That we will be asking, as I said, for repeat offenders, for these cases where it's appropriate, we will be asking for jail time. And we trust the judiciary will be taking these cases seriously. Now, we've already heard, this has caused, some issues over at the courthouse. And a number of cases are now set for trial because we're going to be asking for jail. And my response to that is, that's what we get paid for. So nobody should be complaining about the fact that maybe people have to work harder, whether it's us, public defenders, judges. It may mean more time in court. It may mean a longer time period. That's life. That's what we get paid for. And that's what we should be doing if we can help to deter unlawful conduct. Driving is a privilege. It's not a right. And people know when they're driving without license or driving without insurance, and that should stop.
You'd mentioned a few times, of course, the collaboration with HPD through this effort, through the investigation. And we just wanted to get an update on how things were going with your relationship with new Chief Logan. He's been in office or in this role, I should say, for some time now. And we know that this is a critical relationship that needs to happen between your office and theirs. What is that working relationship? How has that been like working with HPD in your time and with this Chief Logan in his current capacity?
It's been great. I knew Chief Logan briefly back even when he was a police officer before, but then over the years when he was the adjutant general, because I've been involved in the Youth Challenge program for 25 years, which is a great program helping at-risk kids who are 16, 17, who've dropped out of high school to get some discipline in their life and then either go on to school, in college at Leeward Community College or at join the military or otherwise. And so Chief Logan, we go back a long way, but I'm really impressed with the two folks he picked as his deputies, Keith Hirakawa and Rade Vanek. And we had worked with Chief Vanek when he was the acting chief. And I can tell you the relationship between our office and HPD is great. We have dozens of interactions every day with them, because when they're investigating a case and they're deciding what charges, they talk to our deputies in the screening section or in one of the vertical sections about how to do it. And when we do programs like Weed and Seed or Safe and Sound, the level of collaboration is even higher, because we can talk about individual people who are causing so many problems, like identifying people that go into stores and steal literally every day. And now we're charging some of those folks as habitual property offenders, which is a Class C felony. If we get a conviction, it's a minimum of a year in jail, could be up to 5 years. And we're identifying appropriate folks for that. So it's an everyday kind of a thing. We're working very closely with them. I'm really happy about it. I don't think collaboration's ever been better between the prosecutor's office and the police department.
I want to ask you about illegal game rooms. We know that there are some new tools that you have, some new laws that have gone into place. And I understand that there was the first ever person charged under one of those laws. Can you tell the public a little bit about that case and what this will mean when it comes to cracking down on these game rooms in our community?
Okay, well, I think if you talk to public officials and you talk to elected officials, whether it's representatives, senators, city council folks, they get 2 complaints from citizens that overshadow anything else. It's game rooms and drug houses, because both attract the wrong kind of people to their neighborhoods. And that means criminals, that means there's prostitution, drugs, a lot of foot traffic and car traffic at all hours of the day or night. So a year ago, the legislature, we had talked to them at the beginning of the session about how to deal with this effort, and we discussed the idea, what if this became a felony instead of a misdemeanor? And that means promoting gambling in the second degree. That means working at a gambling house, at a game room, either as a cashier, security, or otherwise. And lo and behold, a year ago, they did that. They made it a Class C felony. And I think, we've been working with HPD. We're now charging a case. It's the first of many. But I think a number of people are willing to work at a game room. If they get caught, it's only a misdemeanor. I think that may change if they get caught and it's a felony. And that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, and is there any other tools that you're looking to expand? Because beyond just those who are working here, this continues to be an ongoing problem. And there are other ways that I'm sure that you can tackle this. Are there any other measures that you're looking to possibly include or to change in order to crack down on the illegal gaming that we'll continue to see?
Well, another approach is a lawsuit we filed last year called a nuisance abatement, where you identify a piece of property where it has been used as a gambling house, for instance, and you essentially are bringing a lawsuit against the building owner because we're alleging they knew this was going on. and I think they're probably making more money from that kind of a tenant. And so it's working its way through the civil system, because it's a lawsuit, but it's in civil court, not criminal court. If we're successful in that, we can ask the judge to bar the owner from using the whole building for up to a year. So I think it serves two purposes. One, it's embarrassing. The first case was a building in McCully. It's embarrassing for the building owner to be associated with that kind of a lawsuit. But second, if they lost the use of the property for up to a year, I think that would be a real deterrent, and have the owners decide it's not worth it to rent to gamblers. You know, they're responsible for what goes on in their building. So we're hoping the combination of heightened penalties for those operating the game rooms and then doing the nuisance abatement, we can hit this from a couple of different areas, and we're hoping to, get good outcomes in both areas.
You briefly mentioned Weed and Seed. I'd love to get an update on that. How are things going? Let's talk about both Chinatown and Waikiki. I know that the strategies are a little different neighborhood to neighborhood, but let's start in Waikiki. How are things going there?
Waikiki, because it's such a bigger area, very active. You've got tourists, you've got locals, you've got visitors, you've got military. There are always going to be some problems in Waikiki from a law enforcement standpoint. And everybody who goes on vacation lets their guard down. So the police have pointed out, when you talk about theft from vehicles, almost half the vehicles are unlocked, So, I mean, it's really a challenging area. But the police have been extremely busy. We started back on in September, this past fall, with Safe and Sound in Waikiki. The mayor's been very supportive. The police have been great. We're working together. There have been more than 840 arrests in the area. The homeless population accounts for almost 400 of them, because being homeless, is not a crime. A number of the homeless do commit crimes, though, and everybody's going to be held accountable. And that's the whole point to it. One of the very promising things is we have been asking the courts to issue geographic restrictions. So when people get arrested in this area, the judge can put them on probation. If we convict them, put them on probation, and then say, you can't go back into that area, because there's something about that area that you get in trouble in. And so for the first several months and the first year in Chinatown, we were pretty unsuccessful in getting the courts to grant the geographic restriction. Well, I think they've taken a new look at it. And as of January, we are getting many more of our requests granted. We don't ask it if the person has a residence there, if they work there, or they're receiving services. But in other cases, if they're causing problems there, we're getting the courts to try to keep them out. And we're having much more success since January. In Chinatown, there have been about more than 700 arrests since we started that. But Chinatown is a much smaller area. And one of the things that I'm really proud of, and I think can be expanded in the future, is Chinatown has many folks who are chronically homeless. And the folks sleeping on the street in Chinatown, I'm convinced almost all have mental health problems or drug problems or alcohol problems, or a combination of the two. So we started a new program called Sudafast to help those chronically homeless folks, not only to get off the street when the police arrest them for drug possession, but to help them stay off the street by sending them to treatment. I still am concerned that the judiciary has decided not to monitor people on felony probation very closely anymore. And so trying to help keep those folks sober is going to be more of a challenge. But I'm hoping the judiciary will relook at that and decide to toughen up on probation again. And I hope that, because I think that would really help to keep the community safer.
I want to go back to Safe and Sound Waikiki and just get a little clarification on a few things. One, when you talk about this geographical restrictions that are placed on those offenders who are not allowed within the area, what are the exact boundaries of that? Are they allowed in the Ala Moana area but not into Waikiki? Are there specific guidelines? And also, why wasn't the geographic location or restrictions, I should say, also considered for Chinatown? Is that just considered for what's happening in Waikiki?
Well, first, we've been trying to do that for Chinatown from when it started, which is getting closer to 2 years now. And we were not getting support from the judiciary on that, and we did not understand why. When we did weed and seed the first time 20 years ago, the courts granted it every single time. So we'd never understood that. But when we started in Waikiki, we made a renewed push for it. We talked about it. I've talked about it with you folks. I've talked to other media about it, and essentially said the judiciary is not doing their part in helping to clean up Chinatown, and then not in Waikiki. But the boundaries, it is a specific area, and essentially it's from like the boat harbor at the end, the Alawai Canal on the Mauka side, over to Montserrat, and then around Diamond Head, and down, and then by Black Point down to the ocean, and the ocean all the way to the boat harbor by Ala Moana Park. And the whole idea, it's basically District 6, but District 6 typically ends at La Pietra. And we didn't want homeless folks or others just moving further up Diamond Head to stay out of the site. Folks are pretty smart about this. So as far as population, it's regular Waikiki. It's the ocean to the Alawai, from one end of it to the other. But I have to say, all the hotels have their own security forces, so that they try to keep things on the up and up there. It's when you get into open areas, like from the Moana, where the substation is, down to the wall. A lot of arrests have been made there. HPD has made a number of arrests for selling drugs when we first started. And they really, that's a place where you really get a lot of tourists are there. A lot of local people go surfing there. It's kind of a hot spot, but HPD is really focused there, and it's gotten better. There have been some horrendous crimes in Waikiki. There always have been crimes in Waikiki. I remember when I first started at the prosecutor's office, there was this terrible case of a woman in a bar who went up and patted a blow-up Godzilla doll that some guy had, and he literally stomped her to death, first in the bar, and then she crawled out onto the sidewalk, and then he went out there and he finished the job and he killed her. So, Waikiki, with a mix and as many people as there, have always had a certain number of crimes, but I think we're making steady progress. Part of it's working with the community. We have residents there who identify some of these folks. And one of the promising events here is when there is a geographic restriction imposed on a defendant, then if he or she, typically he, is spotted in Waikiki, residents now, they will tell HPD, they will tell us, we'll get the paperwork going, and then HPD will be able to arrest them on a motion to revoke probation for violating that condition of their probation. And we've really worked closely with HPD and the courts to try to tighten that process up so it can happen really quickly. Because if people keep getting arrested for going back there, we're convinced they're going to figure out some other place to go, and they're less likely to commit crimes in other places than in concentrated places like Waikiki or in Chinatown.
I'm interested both on this issue and the traffic issue that we were talking about earlier. I hear a little bit of frustration in the judiciary from your perspective. And, you're obviously, we know you as a former judge. In your role as Honolulu City Prosecutor, how do you make your case to the judiciary? Are there meetings that happen behind the scenes? Is it public forums like this? How do you, make your case in an ethical way? Of course, you can't work in concert with the judiciary. Right. But, just in fairness, but I'm just interested on what those relationships are like, because it's not like the HPD where you have one person. I mean, you do have the Chief Justice, but each judge sort of makes their own call. So how are you navigating that?
Well, it is a challenge. And each judge, has to look at each case in front of them. What we're trying to do is explain how part of their job is public safety. And I think our judges do a very good job of defending people's rights, making sure it's a fair system in court. I honestly don't know how much thought they've given to the fact that part of their job is public safety, is deterrence in a sentence. It's in the statute. It's and that's maybe an education process. There are a lot of new judges out there too. And we have to make our case in court. We have to be asking for jail time, because if we're not asking for it, we can't, complain as loudly about it not being imposed. I mean, when I was a judge, I would look at each case and I'd listen to the prosecutor and the defense. But some of the time when the prosecutor would ask for something, I would give more than that as far as jail time or prison time. I was the toughest sentencer on the block, toughest sentencer in the courthouse. I was also the first career prosecutor to be appointed to circuit court in Honolulu ever. So the path before me was through the defense bar. So it's changed over the years. It's a much more balanced court now, which I think is good. But partly is bringing things up in public, and partly it's talking to our deputies about let's look forward. I've been in office now 2 years. We're looking at all different parts of the office. We made a lot of different changes to policies and procedures. But now, for traffic court, let's try to make our streets safer and do what we can. And part of that is going to be asking for jail time. And hopefully we'll get a good response from the courts.
We're almost out of time, but I quickly want to ask you about Act 1, which is the first law that Governor Green actually signed into, which was regarding the Obrero case, something that you were talking about and highlighting a few months back. What can you tell us about what has happened there and your thoughts, just how everything transpired?
Well, as it's turned out, the legislature moved quickly. First, the judiciary kind of threw us for a loop with the Obrero case. But then in the D'Angelo case, a little bit after that, they kind of reversed course and gave the judges the opportunity to hold the person in custody for a couple of months if we need to go to grand jury, so they wouldn't get let out. Good news is none of the 90 plus defendants in OCCC for a lot of horrendous crimes, none of them got out. Then the legislature moved with alacrity and made it Act 1, the first bill passed to allow us to get, once again, to go back to preliminary hearings when it's appropriate, as well as grand jury for the serious cases. Then Governor Green made it the very first act. He recognized the importance of it. So I think things are back to normal as far as giving prosecutors the opportunity to fulfill what the voters voted for in the constitutional amendment 40 years ago, that for serious cases, we can either go to grand jury or preliminary hearing. So that issue has been resolved, I think, in a positive way. It took a lot of extra work in between, both here and on all the neighbor islands, but the outcome was good overall.
Okay, we are just about out of time. I want to give you an opportunity for a final thought to the public. As you mentioned, you've been on the job for 2 years now. I'm curious to know, what you'd like the public to know about the job you're doing and how they can help also in their part for public safety.
Okay, well, it's been a great 2 years. We've got some really good deputies here in the office. We have good staff, investigators. We are making a number of changes, making the office as effective as possible, trying to increase the training. We are trying to work on the homelessness issue, and I know the governor's focused on that, legislators. But I would say that housing is really important. But at the same time, in order for people to be successful there, you have got to, for the homeless, deal with drug and alcohol and mental health problems. You need to do both. If you put somebody in an apartment or a little house or whatever, and they have a drug and alcohol problem and it's not being dealt with, they're not going to be successful there. So my wish, we'll keep pushing this. We'll keep trying to do our part in it, is like with Sudafast, help the homeless get into treatment. We would call on the judiciary to once again treat felony probation seriously, but in a rehabilitative way, like in Hope Probation, to hold offenders accountable, but to help them stay sober and help them stay on track. So we're trying to, it's great to work with the mayor, great to work with the governor. We are trying to keep Honolulu as safe as possible, because that is my number one job.
Okay, Honolulu Prosecutor Steve Alm, thanks so much for joining us this morning and giving us an update on all that you're working on and that's happening within your office. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Great to see you folks again.
Thank
Aloha.
you. Well, an interesting mix, Ryan, that we talked about. We started off our conversation talking about the case involving that 16-year-old high school student who was killed, Sarah Yara, in February. on Kapiolani Boulevard in a hit and run incident. There are a lot of folks who, are frustrated that this case is not moving forward as fast as the public would like. The prosecutor saying that HPD is still investigating, and these cases often take longer than folks would like. But rest assured that they are seeking justice in that case and in others. And overall, more broadly, he spoke about how they really are going to be pushing as an office to have jail time for these folks who have repeat offenders. The incident who was arrested in this case had 164 traffic violations, but there are other people who are out on the roads driving without a license. He would like to see a fine, then a steeper fine, and then moving on to jail time. And they can do that, he says, with existing laws.
Yeah, and good to hear, though, that this unfortunate incident has caused the community to really galvanize. He said we've seen a lot of movement with different various stakeholders involved, from the State Department of Transportation, as well as different lawmakers, as well as his office and HPD, all working together to not only address what has happened here, but how to prevent this from moving forward in this case by creating those stiffer penalties for those repeat offenders and finding ways where there can be a harsher punishment so that this incident and these types of drivers are not allowed back on the road. We also got an update on what efforts he's taking to crack down on the illegal gaming rooms by doing different tools, as he says, to try to combat this, whether it be going after landlords that know these types of illegal operations are happening within their buildings or their places of establishment, as well as those who work within some of these establishments, and really increasing some of the penalties that would come forward for those individuals. Interesting to hear how they're tackling this issue, because this is something that we continue to see in the headlines with these game rooms being exposed throughout our community.
That's right. He did mention that the first case has been now charged under the new law that the legislature passed last session, which moved it up from a misdemeanor to a felony. And he thinks that that could act as a deterrent as we start to see more individuals get charged and perhaps, sent to jail under these stiffer penalties, that maybe people will think twice about working in these establishments or being associated with them. Also got an update on Waikiki and Chinatown. He said that, he highlighted a number of arrests that have been made, and really drilling down on the issue of substance abuse and saying that, we have to deal with that issue at its core, because we see these repeat offenders. And a lot of that, of course, is motivated by drug addiction or alcohol addiction. Talking about the geographic exemptions, or rather restrictions that they would have to try to keep people out of certain high areas where they have a propensity to commit more crimes, and seeing the judiciary sort of act on that. But really interesting throughout our conversation, really calling on the judges to do their part in helping to prevent crimes as well.
Yeah, and we've heard it from other community activists that we spoke to on this program as well, who have monitored areas like Chinatown and are seemingly frustrated at times that the sentencings and the penalties that are handed out are not strict enough. And so we'll see how things evolve. You'd asked him about how those type of dynamics work between the prosecuting office and, of course, the judiciary, and having public forums, public conversations like this may change things over time. We'll see what happens, and continue to keep in touch with the prosecutor's office to have him on again in the future. On Friday, we focus in on the economy, something that a lot of people are continuing to keep their eyes on, with not only here locally, but nationally as well.
That's right. We did see the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, and then there have been a lot of questions in the days and weeks that followed about the health and wellness of regional banks overall. We're going to be talking to economist Paul Brubaker about how our local banks are faring in this new environment, and also asking him about possible recession, inflation. There's always so much to talk about with Paul Brubaker. We know that a lot of you have questions for him when it comes to housing and where housing should go. So join us right back here on Friday, 10:30 with Paul Brubaker. We hope to see you then.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.